Marcus Thompson had been out of the military for 3 years, but his body still woke up at 0500 hours every morning. Old habits die hard, especially when those habits kept you alive in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. He rolled out of bed in his small apartment in downtown Seattle, his joints protesting slightly more than they used to. At 32, he was still in excellent shape, but the countless missions in Afghanistan and Iraq had left their marks. The morning routine never changed. Push-ups, sit-ups, a 5-mile run through the city streets while most people were still dreaming. Marcus moved through the urban landscape like a ghost, his footsteps silent despite his speed. Even in civilian life, he couldn't shake the training that had been drilled into him during his 8 years as a Navy SEAL sniper. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every rooftop was a potential vantage point. Every person on the street was assessed and cataloged before being dismissed as non-hostile. After his run, Marcus showered and dressed in his security company uniform. Thompson Security Solutions wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and kept him busy. Most of his clients were wealthy executives who needed discreet protection or companies that wanted someone with military experience watching their facilities. Today's assignment was different, though. He was heading to the Pacific Northwest Gun Show, working security for one of the vendors. The gun show was held in a massive convention center on the outskirts of the city. As Marcus walked through the entrance, the familiar smells of gun oil and metal polish filled his nostrils. Hundreds of vendors had set up booths displaying everything from antique hunting rifles to modern tactical equipment. The crowd was a mix of serious collectors, weekend warriors, and curious civilians. Marcus made his way to booth 47, where his client Dave Morrison was setting up his display. Dave was a former Marine who specialized in selling high-end scopes and precision equipment to law enforcement and military contractors. His booth always drew attention from serious shooters who appreciated quality optics. "Marcus, good to see you again," Dave said, shaking his hand firmly. "Should be a busy day today. I've got some new thermal scopes that are drawing a lot of interest." Marcus nodded and began his assessment of the booth's security situation. The layout was good, with clear sight lines and multiple exit routes. The merchandise was valuable enough to attract thieves, but the gun show's own security was typically tight. Still, Marcus positioned himself where he could watch both the crowd and Dave's expensive inventory. The morning passed quietly. Customers came and went, examining scopes, asking technical questions, and making purchases. Marcus observed everything while staying in the background. His trained eye picked up details others missed. The nervous fidgeting of a potential shoplifter, the way a customer's jacket hung suggesting a concealed weapon, the body language of people who might be sizing up the booth for a later robbery attempt. Around noon, 3 men approached the booth together. Marcus immediately noticed something off about them. They moved with the swagger of people trying too hard to look tough. Their clothes were expensive but flashy, and they kept glancing around nervously. The tallest of the 3, a heavy-set man with gold teeth and multiple tattoos covering his arms, pointed at one of Dave's most expensive scopes. "How much for that one?" the man asked, his voice carrying a slight accent Marcus couldn't quite place. Dave walked over to the display case. "That's a thermal imaging scope, military grade. Retail price is $8,000. The tattooed man whistled low. "That's some serious money. What kind of range you get with something like that?" "Depends on the conditions, but you're looking at effective target acquisition out to 2,000 meters in complete darkness," Dave explained professionally. The 3 men exchanged glances. The second man, shorter but more muscular than the first, leaned in closer. "You got anything that shows how it works? Like a demonstration or something?" Marcus felt his instincts prickling. Something about these men's questions felt wrong. They weren't asking about the scope's specifications like genuine customers would. Instead, they seemed more interested in its capabilities for surveillance or other questionable purposes. "I can show you the manual and some technical specs," Dave offered, reaching for a binder. The third man, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "What about range time? You guys ever test these things out in real conditions?" This question made Marcus step slightly closer. Testing scopes wasn't unusual, but the way the man asked suggested he might be fishing for information about locations where such testing might occur. Locations that would be isolated and potentially vulnerable. Dave seemed to sense something too. His answer became more cautious. We do factory testing, of course. All equipment is tested before sale. The tattooed man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Must be nice having all this expensive gear just sitting here. What kind of security you running? That question crossed a line. Marcus stepped forward from his position near the back of the booth, making his presence known for the first time. His movement was casual but deliberate, and all three men immediately noticed him. "Can I help you gentlemen with something specific?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of authority. The tattooed man looked Marcus up and down, taking in his physical presence and alert posture. "Just browsing, man. This is a gun show, right? We're allowed to look around." "Of course," Marcus replied evenly. "Dave here is happy to answer questions about his products. Are you interested in purchasing anything today?" The tension in the air was palpable. The three men were clearly not comfortable with Marcus's scrutiny, and he could see them reassessing their situation. The middle man whispered something to the tattooed leader, who nodded slightly. "Maybe we'll come back later," the leader said, already backing away from the booth, "when it's not so crowded." As they walked away, Marcus memorized every detail about them. Their faces, their clothing, their body language, the way they moved through the crowd. Years of training had taught him to catalog potential threats, and these three men definitely qualified. Dave exhaled slowly once they were gone. "Thanks for that. Something felt off about those guys." "Trust your instincts," Marcus advised. "They weren't here to buy anything. They were gathering intelligence." "Intelligence for what?" Marcus watched the three men disappearing into the crowd near the main entrance. "Nothing good. I'm going to make a quick call to the show's security. Let them know to keep an eye out for those guys." As Marcus pulled out his phone, he noticed the three men had stopped near the entrance and were having an animated conversation. The tattooed leader was gesturing back toward Dave's booth while talking rapidly to his companions. Whatever they were planning, Marcus had definitely disrupted it. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident, but Marcus remained alert. His military training had taught him that threats rarely disappeared completely. They usually just changed tactics and timing. As the gun show began winding down for the day, he helped Dave pack up the most valuable items first. "You think we'll see those guys again?" Dave asked as he secured a case full of expensive scopes. "I'd bet on it," Marcus replied, scanning the thinning crowd. "But maybe not here, and maybe not today." As they finished packing, Marcus noticed a small piece of paper tucked under one corner of the display table. He palmed it quickly without Dave noticing and read it later when he stepped away for a moment. Written in crude handwriting were the words, "Miss, and you die." The message was clearly meant as a threat, probably left by one of the three men when Marcus had briefly looked away. It was amateurish and poorly thought out, but it confirmed his suspicions that these men had criminal intentions. Marcus folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He'd dealt with threats before, both overseas and in civilian life. The difference was that overseas, the rules of engagement were clear. Here in Seattle, he had to work within the law while still protecting his client. As Dave loaded the last of his equipment into his van, Marcus made a decision. "Dave, I think you should consider hiring additional security for the next few shows." "You think it's that serious?" Marcus looked out across the parking lot, noting the vehicles and their occupants, automatically cataloging potential threats and escape routes. "Better safe than sorry. These guys might try to follow you home or hit your store. People who leave threatening notes usually aren't done making threats." Dave nodded grimly. "I'll think about it. Can you recommend anyone? I'll make some calls. In the meantime, vary your routes home, park in well-lit areas, and keep your eyes open." As Dave drove away, Marcus remained in the parking lot for a few more minutes, watching and waiting. His patience was rewarded when he spotted a familiar car pulling out from the far end of the lot. It was a black sedan with tinted windows, and through the windshield he could make out the silhouette of the tattooed man behind the wheel. The sedan followed Dave's van at a distance, confirming Marcus's worst fears. These men weren't just casual troublemakers. They were professional enough to conduct surveillance and patient enough to wait for the right opportunity. Marcus got into his own vehicle and followed at an even greater distance, keeping both cars in sight while remaining undetected himself. This was a skill he'd perfected during countless reconnaissance missions overseas, and it felt natural to slip back into that mindset. The chase continued through the city streets as evening traffic began to build. Dave's van took the most direct route toward his store in the warehouse district, apparently unaware he was being followed. The black sedan maintained its position, professional in its surveillance, but not professional enough to spot Marcus's counter-surveillance. As they approached the industrial area where Dave's store was located, Marcus realized the three men had chosen their target well. The warehouse district was mostly empty after business hours, with few witnesses and plenty of isolated locations perfect for an ambush. He reached for his phone to call Dave and warn him, but before he could dial, everything changed. The black sedan suddenly accelerated, closing the distance to Dave's van rapidly. Marcus watched as the passenger window rolled down, and a hand emerged holding what looked like a pistol. The game had just escalated from threats to attempted murder, and Marcus Thompson was about to discover that some skills never fade away, no matter how long you've been out of the military. Marcus slammed his foot on the accelerator as the black sedan moved in for what looked like a drive-by shooting. His military training kicked in instantly, muscle memory overriding 3 years of civilian life. Target assessment, threat evaluation, and tactical response all processed in microseconds as he closed the distance between his vehicle and the attackers. The passenger in the sedan had his gun arm extended out the window, aiming at Dave's van. Marcus could see the muzzle flash even before he heard the shots over the noise of traffic and engines. The van swerved wildly as Dave realized he was under attack, tires squealing as he tried to escape down a side street. Without hesitation, Marcus yanked his steering wheel hard to the right and drove his SUV directly into the rear quarter panel of the black sedan. The impact sent the attacker's car spinning sideways, the gunman's shots going wild as he fought to stay in his seat. The sedan's driver fought for control, but Marcus's tactical ramming had done its job. Their vehicle was no longer an effective weapons platform. The sedan skidded to a stop against a concrete barrier, steam rising from its crumpled hood. Marcus pulled his vehicle to a halt 30 yards away, positioning it so he could use the engine block for cover if needed. Through his windshield, he could see all three men were still conscious and moving inside the damaged car. Dave's van had disappeared around the corner, hopefully heading straight to the police station. Marcus grabbed his phone and dialed 911 while keeping his eyes on the sedan. 911, what's your emergency? This is Marcus Thompson, former Navy SEAL working private security. I just witnessed an attempted murder and stopped the attackers. I need police and ambulance at the intersection of Industrial Boulevard and 5th Avenue. 3 suspects in a black sedan, at least one armed with a handgun. Sir, are you injured? Are the suspects still on scene? I'm uninjured. Suspects are still here, but their vehicle is disabled. I'm maintaining overwatch from a safe distance. As Marcus spoke, the 3 men began climbing out of their wrecked car. The tattooed leader emerged from the driver's side, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, but otherwise appearing functional. The gunman stumbled out of the passenger side, his right arm hanging at an odd angle, probably dislocated from the impact. The third man crawled out through the rear door, moving slowly but apparently unhurt. The suspects are mobile, Marcus reported to the 911 operator. Driver appears lightly injured. Passenger has possible arm injury. Third suspect seems unharmed. I can see one handgun on the ground near their vehicle. The tattooed man looked around until he spotted Marcus's SUV. Even at a distance, Marcus could see the rage on his face. The man reached inside the sedan and pulled out what looked like another pistol, then began walking toward Marcus with clear hostile intent. Suspect is now armed and approaching my position, Marcus told the operator. I may need to defend myself. Sir, police units are en route. Estimated arrival time is 4 minutes. 4 minutes was a lifetime in a firefight. Marcus ended the call and assessed his tactical situation. He was in decent cover behind his vehicle, but the approaching gunman would have multiple angles of attack. The smart move would be to drive away and let the police handle it, but Marcus couldn't risk these men escaping to threaten Dave or other innocent people. The tattooed man was now 50 yards away and closing, his pistol held low but ready. Marcus could see the man was trying to angle for a flanking position where Marcus's vehicle wouldn't provide cover. It was actually a smart tactical approach, suggesting the man had some training or combat experience. Marcus quietly opened his driver's door and slipped out, staying low behind the SUV. He moved to the rear of the vehicle, using the chassis and wheels for maximum protection. The approaching gunman couldn't see exactly where Marcus was positioned, which gave him a slight advantage. At 30 yards, the tattooed man raised his pistol and fired 3 quick shots at Marcus's SUV. The bullets sparked off the metal and shattered the rear window, but Marcus remained safely behind the engine block. He could hear the other 2 men moving around behind their sedan, probably trying to flank him from the other direction. This was turning into a classic tactical situation, multiple armed opponents attempting to establish crossfire, while Marcus held a defensive position with limited ammunition and no backup. In Afghanistan, he would have called for air support or additional troops. Here in Seattle, he had to wait for the police and hope they arrived before the situation deteriorated further. The gunman fired another volley, this time aiming lower to try ricocheting bullets under the vehicle. Marcus heard the shots whining off the pavement near his feet, forcing him to adjust his position. These men weren't professional soldiers, but they were persistent and clearly had nothing to lose. Marcus pulled out his own sidearm, a compact Glock 19 that he carried with proper permits and licensing. 8 years of military training had made him extremely proficient with firearms, but he'd hoped never to use those skills in civilian life. The situation was rapidly moving beyond simple self-defense into a genuine urban firefight. "Police, drop your weapons." The shout came from somewhere behind the attacker's position. Marcus felt a surge of relief as he heard the first police sirens approaching. The tattooed gunman heard them too and began looking around frantically for an escape route. The man shouted something in a language Marcus didn't recognize to his 2 companions, then began backing toward a narrow alley between 2 warehouse buildings. The sound of police sirens grew louder, and Marcus could see flashing lights reflecting off the buildings. The 3 attackers were now caught between his position and the approaching officers, exactly where he'd wanted them. But desperate men with guns were unpredictable, and Marcus knew the next few minutes would be the most dangerous. The injured gunman with the dislocated arm suddenly broke from cover behind their sedan and ran toward the alley where his leader was heading. He was moving awkwardly, favoring his injured side, but he still had a weapon in his left hand. Marcus tracked his movement, but held fire. With police arriving, any gunshots could cause confusion about who was the threat. 2 police cruisers rounded the corner at high speed, their emergency lights painting the industrial landscape in red and blue. The officers inside would be running on adrenaline and incomplete information, making this a highly volatile situation for everyone involved. The tattooed leader fired 2 shots at the lead police car, shattering its windshield and forcing the officer to swerve behind a parked truck. The second police car pulled up beside Marcus's position, and he could see the officer inside speaking rapidly into his radio while drawing his service weapon. "Former military, I'm the one who called this in," Marcus shouted to the officer, keeping his hands visible. 3 suspects, at least 2 armed, moving toward the alley. The officer nodded and used his car door for cover while assessing the situation. Marcus pointed toward the alley where 2 of the attackers had disappeared, then gestured to where the 3rd man was still crouched behind the damaged sedan. More police units were arriving now, their sirens echoing off the warehouse walls. Marcus could see officers positioning themselves to surround the area and prevent the suspects from escaping. The professional response was textbook urban tactical deployment, and he felt confident the situation was about to be resolved. But the 3rd attacker, the one still behind the sedan, apparently decided he wasn't going to be taken alive. He suddenly stood up with a large caliber revolver in both hands and began firing rapidly at the police positions. The shots were wild and inaccurate, but they forced everyone to take cover and disrupted the officer's careful positioning. Marcus found himself in an impossible situation. He was caught between the police perimeter and an armed suspect who was now shooting at law enforcement. Any movement could be misinterpreted by either side, potentially making him a target for friendly fire. The suspect's gun clicked empty after 6 shots, and Marcus heard him cursing as he tried to reload. This was the moment of maximum vulnerability. The man was focused on his weapon and temporarily unable to return fire. Without thinking, Marcus rose from cover and sprinted toward the suspect's position. His military training took over completely, and he moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd conducted similar takedowns dozens of times in combat zones. The suspect saw him coming and fumbled with his reload, trying to get fresh cartridges into the revolver's cylinder. Marcus covered the 20-yard distance in less than 4 seconds. He tackled the armed man low and hard, driving his shoulder into the suspect's midsection and sending both of them crashing to the pavement behind the sedan. The revolver went flying, clattering across the asphalt well out of reach. The impact drove the wind out of both men, but Marcus recovered first. Years of hand-to-hand combat training allowed him to establish a dominant position quickly, pinning the suspect face down with his arm twisted behind his back in a classic submission hold. "Don't move," Marcus shouted, as much for the arriving police officers as for the man beneath him. Suspect is disarmed and secured. Multiple officers rushed forward with weapons drawn, but they could see the situation was under control. Marcus slowly raised his free hand while maintaining his hold on the suspect, showing the officers he was cooperating with their commands. "I'm the security contractor who called this in," he said calmly. "This suspect was shooting at your units. His weapon is about 10 feet to my left." The lead officer approached carefully, his gun still drawn but pointed in a safe direction. "Sir, I need you to slowly release the suspect and step back with your hands visible." Marcus complied immediately, releasing his hold and backing away with his hands raised. The suspect tried to get up and run, but 2 officers were on him instantly, handcuffs clicking into place as they read him his rights. As the immediate danger passed, Marcus became aware of how his heart was pounding and his hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Combat stress reactions were normal, even for experienced soldiers, and it had been 3 years since his last real firefight. The lead officer approached Marcus while his partner secured the crime scene. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Williams. I understand you're the one who called this in and helped stop these suspects." "That's correct. My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm a former Navy SEAL working private security. I witnessed these men attempting to murder my client and followed them here." Sergeant Williams nodded as he took notes. "We're going to need a full statement, but first I need to ask, are you armed?" "Yes, concealed carry permit," Marcus replied, slowly reaching for his wallet to show his credentials. After checking Marcus's identification and permits, Sergeant Williams seemed to relax slightly. "Mr. Thompson, I have to say, your intervention probably saved lives today. Those men were clearly intent on violence, and your tactical response was textbook." As they spoke, Marcus could hear radio chatter indicating that the other 2 suspects had been cornered in the alley and were surrendering to police. The situation was finally under control, but Marcus knew this was just the beginning. There would be investigations, reports, court proceedings, and probably media attention. More importantly, he needed to make sure Dave was safe and find out why these men had targeted him in the first place. The threatening note suggested this wasn't a random crime, and Marcus's instincts told him there was more to this story than a simple robbery gone wrong. The sound of an ambulance arriving reminded him that violence always had consequences, even when the good guys won. As he watched paramedics examining the injured suspects, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what chain of events had led to this moment, and whether it was truly over or just the beginning of something larger. The police station smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant, familiar scents that reminded Marcus of military briefing rooms around the world. He'd been there for 3 hours, giving his statement to Detective Sarah Chun, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who asked precise questions and took detailed notes. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Detective Chun said, reviewing her notes. "You observed these 3 suspects casing your client's booth at the gun show, followed them when they began surveillance of your client's vehicle, and intervened when they attempted what appeared to be a drive-by shooting." "That's accurate," Marcus confirmed. The whole situation felt wrong from the beginning. Their questions weren't those of legitimate customers, and their behavior suggested they were gathering intelligence for criminal purposes. Detective Chun leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Thompson, your military background is impressive, and your actions today likely prevented a murder. But I have to ask, did you consider calling for police backup before engaging these suspects yourself?" It was a fair question, and Marcus had been expecting it. Detective, the situation developed rapidly. From the time I recognized the threat to when shots were fired was maybe 30 seconds. There wasn't time to coordinate with law enforcement without risking my client's life. I understand. What I'm trying to determine is whether this was a random crime targeting a gun dealer or something more specific to your client. Marcus pulled the threatening note from his pocket and handed it to the detective. I found this tucked under Dave Morrison's display table after those 3 men left his booth. Someone left it as a warning. Detective Chun examined the note carefully, then placed it in an evidence bag. This changes things significantly. The handwriting is crude, but the message suggests premeditation. Do you know of any reason why Mr. Morrison might be targeted specifically? Not yet, but I intend to find out. Dave's been in business for 15 years, mostly selling high-end optics to law enforcement and military contractors. He's got a clean reputation and no history of problems. We'll need to interview Mr. Morrison extensively. In the meantime, I can tell you what we've learned about your 3 suspects. Detective Chin opened a file folder. The leader, Miguel Santos, has a record for armed robbery and weapons trafficking. The shooter, Anton Petrov, is wanted on federal charges for illegal arms dealing. The third man, Carlos Mendez, has connections to several organized crime groups on the West Coast. Marcus felt a chill as the implications sank in. This wasn't random. These men are professional criminals with connections to weapons trafficking. Dave's inventory would be valuable to people like that. That's our thinking too. Mr. Morrison deals in military-grade optics that could easily be resold on the black market. The question is whether they specifically targeted him or were looking for any high-value vendor to rob. The threatening note suggests it was personal, Marcus said. You don't leave warnings for random robbery targets. Someone wanted Dave to know he was being watched. Detective Chin's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it quickly, then looked up with a grim expression. Mr. Thompson, we just got word from the hospital. Anton Petrov, the shooter, wants to make a deal. He's offering information about a larger operation in exchange for reduced charges. What kind of operation? He won't talk to anyone but federal agents. Claims it involves international weapons smuggling and that your client was specifically targeted because of his connections to military contractors. Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Dave wasn't just a client anymore. He was a friend in danger, and the threat was apparently much larger than a simple robbery attempt. Detective, I need to contact Dave and make sure he's secure. If Petrov is telling the truth about a larger operation, Dave could still be in danger. We've already sent units to check on Mr. Morrison. He's safe at the downtown precinct giving his statement. But, Mr. Thompson, I need you to understand something. If this really is connected to international weapons trafficking, it's going to become a federal case. The FBI will take over, and they might not want civilian contractors involved. Marcus understood the politics, but he also understood his obligations. Dave hired me to protect him, and that contract doesn't expire just because the feds get involved. If anything, it makes my job more important. Detective Chun seemed to consider this. I respect your loyalty, Mr. Thompson, and, frankly, your military experience might be valuable if this situation escalates. But you'll need to coordinate with federal agents, not work independently. Understood. When do we meet with the FBI? Special Agent Rodriguez is driving up from the Seattle field office. Should be here within the hour. In the meantime, I suggest you contact your client and brief him on what we've learned. Marcus thanked Detective Chun and stepped outside to make his calls. The evening air was crisp and clean after the stale atmosphere of the police station. As he dialed Dave's number, he found himself automatically scanning the street for potential threats, a habit that had probably saved his life today and might again. Marcus, thank God. Dave answered on the first ring. Are you okay? The police told me you stopped those men, but I was worried you might have been hurt. I'm fine, Dave, but we need to talk. This situation is bigger than we initially thought. Can you meet me somewhere secure? I'm still at the police station downtown. Detective Williams says I can leave any time, but he suggested I might want to consider staying somewhere other than my apartment tonight. Good advice. Do you have somewhere safe you can go? Family, friends outside the city. My brother lives in Portland. I could drive down there tonight if you think it's necessary. Marcus considered the tactical situation. Portland was far enough away to provide temporary safety, but It also meant Dave would be outside Marcus's protection. On the other hand, staying in Seattle while federal agents sorted out the larger criminal conspiracy could put Dave in more danger. Dave, I just learned that the men who attacked you are part of a weapons trafficking operation. They specifically targeted you, not just any gun dealer. The FBI is getting involved, which means this is serious. There was a long silence on the phone. When Dave spoke again, his voice was strained. Marcus, there's something I should probably tell you. About 6 months ago, I was approached by some federal agents asking questions about certain customers who had purchased high-end scopes from me. Marcus felt another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. What kind of questions? They wanted to know about export licenses, international shipping, customers who seemed more interested in the equipment's surveillance capabilities than its hunting applications. At the time, I thought they were just doing routine checks on sensitive equipment sales. Did they mention any specific customers or investigations? Not directly, but they asked a lot of questions about a company called Strategic Optics International. Apparently, some of their customers had been flagged for suspicious activity. Marcus knew that name. Strategic Optics International was a defense contractor that supplied specialized equipment to military units around the world. If they were under federal investigation, it could explain why criminals would target Dave's business. Dave, listen carefully. Don't go home tonight. Drive to your brother's place in Portland, and don't tell anyone where you're going except me. I'll coordinate with the FBI and make sure they know how to contact you safely. You think these people will try again? I think they're part of something much larger than a simple robbery. Until we know the full scope of what we're dealing with, you need to stay out of sight. After ending the call with Dave, Marcus returned to the police station to wait for the FBI agents. Detective Chin met him at the desk sergeant station with an update. Petrov is talking, she said quietly. Apparently, your client has been unknowingly selling equipment to a smuggling operation that ships military optics to prohibited countries. The criminals thought he was part of the operation and tried to eliminate him when they realized he'd been cooperating with federal investigators. So Dave was targeted because he was helping the government? Exactly. And, according to Petrov, there are more attempts planned. The organization he works for doesn't forgive what they see as betrayal. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Dave was an innocent businessman who'd done the right thing by cooperating with federal investigators. And now he was marked for death by international criminals. It was exactly the kind of injustice that had motivated Marcus to become a Navy SEAL in the first place. Detective, when Agent Rodriguez arrives, I want to volunteer for whatever operation they're planning. Dave is my responsibility, and I'm not walking away from this. I thought you might say that. For what it's worth, I think they could use someone with your background. This isn't going to be a typical law enforcement operation. 20 minutes later, Special Agent Maria Rodriguez arrived with 2 other federal agents. She was a compact woman in her 30s with intelligent eyes and the kind of confident bearing that came from years of dealing with dangerous situations. Mr. Thompson, she said, shaking his hand firmly. I've been briefed on your actions today. Impressive work stopping those suspects, but I understand you're concerned about your client's ongoing safety. That's correct. Dave Morrison is a good man who was trying to help your investigation. He doesn't deserve to die for doing the right thing. Agent Rodriguez nodded approvingly. I agree completely. Mr. Morrison's cooperation has been valuable to our investigation into Strategic Optics International and their connections to international weapons smuggling. We have every intention of keeping him safe. What's the plan? That depends partly on you, Mr. Thompson. We could relocate Mr. Morrison into witness protection, but that would take him off the board permanently. Alternatively, we could use him as bait to draw out the remaining members of this criminal organization. Marcus understood immediately. You want to use Dave to lure them into a trap. With proper safeguards and his consent, yes. Your presence today disrupted their operation, but it didn't eliminate the threat. These people will try again, and next time they'll be better prepared. What would my role be in this operation? Agent Rodriguez exchanged glances with her colleagues. Mr. Thompson, we've reviewed your military record. Your sniper training and special operations experience make you uniquely qualified to provide overwatch for this kind of operation. We're prepared to offer you a temporary contract position with the Bureau. Marcus felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. This was exactly the kind of mission he'd trained for, the kind of work that gave his life purpose and meaning. But it was also dangerous, not just for him but for Dave. I need to talk to Dave first. This has to be his choice. Of course. But, Mr. Thompson, I should warn you. Our intelligence suggests this criminal organization has connections to foreign intelligence services. If we don't stop them now, Mr. Morrison will never be truly safe, no matter where he goes. The stakes were higher than Marcus had realized. This wasn't just about protecting one man from criminal revenge. It was about disrupting an international operation that threatened national security. Agent Rodriguez, if Dave agrees to this, I want full operational control over his personal security. No federal agents making decisions that could compromise his safety. Agreed. Your tactical expertise in this area exceeds ours. And, frankly, your personal investment in his welfare might be more reliable than bureaucratic procedures. Marcus looked around the police station, taking in the controlled chaos of law enforcement officers processing evidence and writing reports. In a few hours, he'd gone from working routine security to potentially joining a federal operation against international criminals. But, as he thought about the threatening note and the cold professionalism of the men who'd tried to kill Dave, Marcus knew there was really no choice to make. Some fights chose you, whether you wanted them or not. This was one of those fights. 3 days later, Marcus lay flat on the roof of a warehouse building, his eye pressed to the scope of a precision rifle he hadn't touched in 3 years. The familiar weight of the weapon felt both foreign and natural in his hands, like meeting an old friend after a long separation. Below him, Dave Morrison's gun shop sat in the industrial district like a carefully baited trap. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Dave had agreed to return to his shop and resume normal business operations, while federal agents posed as customers and delivery personnel. Marcus provided overwatch from his elevated position, with clear sight lines covering all approaches to the building. If the remaining members of the smuggling operation made another attempt on Dave's life, they would find themselves walking into a perfectly orchestrated ambush. Through his earpiece, Marcus could hear the quiet chatter of the surveillance team positioned around the perimeter. Agent Rodriguez was coordinating from a mobile command post 2 blocks away, while Dave worked in his shop below, his nervous energy visible even from Marcus's elevated position. Overwatch, this is command. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled in his ear. Any movement in your sector? Negative, command. All approaches remain clear. Marcus swept his scope across the industrial landscape, cataloging every vehicle, pedestrian, and potential hiding spot within a half-mile radius. The past 72 hours had been intensive. Agent Rodriguez had briefed Marcus on the full scope of the criminal organization they were facing. Strategic Optics International was a front company for smuggling military-grade equipment to foreign buyers, including several countries under arms embargoes. Dave's high-end scopes were perfect for the operation because they could be legally purchased in the United States and, then, illegally exported without detection. When Dave had begun cooperating with the FBI investigation, the criminals had initially tried to recruit him as a willing participant. When that failed, they decided to eliminate him as a potential witness. The 3 men Marcus had confronted were just the advance team. Intelligence suggested the main operation involved at least a dozen people with connections to Eastern European organized crime. Movement in Sector 3, came a voice from one of the perimeter teams. Black SUV, tinted windows, moving slowly past the target building. Marcus immediately shifted his scope to cover that approach. Through the magnification, he could see a late-model Suburban with dealer plates cruising past Dave's shop. The vehicle's pace was too slow for normal traffic, and the occupants appeared to be studying the building carefully. I have eyes on the vehicle, Marcus reported. 2 occupants visible in front seats. Can't see rear compartment due to window tint. Vehicle is conducting obvious surveillance. Copy that, Overwatch. Perimeter teams, maintain positions, but be ready to move on my command. The SUV completed its pass and disappeared around a corner, but Marcus knew they'd be back. This was classic reconnaissance behavior. Multiple passes to identify security measures and escape routes before committing to an attack. Dave's voice came through the communication system, tight with tension. How much longer do we have to wait? This is making me nervous. Stay calm, Mr. Morrison, Agent Rodriguez responded. Remember, we want them to see normal business activity. Just keep working on that scope you were adjusting. Marcus watched Dave through his scope, noting the man's obvious stress despite his attempts to appear normal. In combat situations, Marcus had learned that civilian courage was different from military training. Soldiers were conditioned to function under stress, but civilians like Dave were operating purely on willpower and determination. 20 minutes later, the black SUV returned, this time accompanied by a white panel van. Both vehicles moved with more purpose now, and Marcus could see additional occupants inside. Command, we have escalation. 2 vehicles, approximately 6 to 8 occupants total. This looks like the main event. Understood, Overwatch. All teams, prepare for engagement. Remember, we want prisoners for interrogation if possible. Marcus watched the vehicles position themselves at opposite ends of the block, creating a classic pincer movement designed to control the area and prevent escape. It was actually good tactical planning, which suggested these criminals had military or law enforcement training. The panel van stopped directly in front of Dave's shop, while the SUV positioned itself to block the rear exit. Marcus could see armed figures moving inside both vehicles, preparing for what looked like a coordinated assault. Command, subjects are deploying for immediate assault. I count 4 individuals exiting the panel van, 2 remaining in the SUV as drivers. All appear to be armed. Roger, Overwatch. You are cleared to engage any armed threats to Mr. Morrison's safety. Marcus felt the familiar calm settle over him as his training took control. His breathing slowed, his heart rate steadied, and the world narrowed to the precise mechanics of long-range shooting. Distance to target, 230 meters. Wind speed, negligible. Temperature, steady. All factors calculated and compensated for automatically by years of experience. The 4 men from the panel van approached Dave's shop with professional efficiency. They moved in a tactical formation, covering each other's movements and maintaining situational awareness. These weren't street criminals. They were trained operators conducting a military-style assault. The lead man reached the front door and tried the handle, finding it locked as expected. He stepped back while a second man approached with what looked like a small explosive charge. They were planning to blow the door and storm the building, probably intending to kill Dave quickly and escape before law enforcement could respond. Command, subjects are preparing explosive breach. Initiating engagement. Marcus settled his crosshairs on the man holding the explosive device. At this range, with his scope and training, missing was essentially impossible. He controlled his breathing, felt the familiar trigger pressure, and squeezed off the shot. The bullet struck the explosive's handler center mass, dropping him instantly and sending the breaching charge flying across the pavement. The other 3 attackers immediately took cover, scanning frantically for the source of the shot. Sniper! Sniper! Marcus could hear their panicked shouts even from his elevated position. The perimeter teams moved in immediately, their vehicles converging on the scene with sirens blaring. But the remaining attackers were professional enough to have planned for this contingency. Instead of surrendering, they began laying down suppressive fire to cover their retreat to the panel van. Marcus tracked the nearest target through his scope as the man sprinted toward the vehicle. The range was still well within his capabilities, but the target was moving fast and using parked cars for concealment. Marcus led the target carefully, accounting for speed and direction, then fired again. The second shot caught the running man in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him behind a parked sedan. Not a killing shot, but effective in removing him from the fight and providing law enforcement with another prisoner for interrogation. The remaining 2 attackers reached their panel van and dove inside as the driver gunned the engine. Marcus shifted his aim to the vehicle itself, trying to disable it before it could escape. His 3rd shot shattered the rear window, and his 4th punctured the left rear tire, but the van continued moving. Command, 2 subjects escaped in the damaged panel van. Vehicle is heading east on Industrial Boulevard, left rear tire flat, rear window destroyed. Copy, Overwatch. Pursuit units are responding. Excellent shooting, 2 targets down, no friendly casualties. The SUV that had been blocking the rear exit suddenly accelerated toward the front of the building, apparently trying to extract the wounded attackers. Marcus could see the driver was young and panicked, making tactical errors that a more experienced operator wouldn't have made. As the SUV approached the 2 wounded men, Marcus faced a tactical decision. He could potentially disable the vehicle and capture all remaining suspects, but it would require shooting at a rapidly moving target with civilians in the area. The safer choice was to let them escape and rely on the pursuit units to intercept them. The decision was made for him when one of the wounded attackers produced a pistol and began shooting at the approaching federal agents. Marcus immediately shifted his aim and fired, the bullet striking the gunman's weapon hand and sending the pistol spinning away across the asphalt. Threat neutralized, Marcus reported. All subjects are down or fleeing. Building is secure. Through his scope, he watched federal agents swarming the area, securing the wounded attackers and checking on Dave's safety. The immediate danger was over, but Marcus remained in position, scanning for additional threats that might still be hidden in the area. Agent Rodriguez's voice came through his earpiece with obvious relief and professional satisfaction. Outstanding work, Overwatch. Your precision shooting prevented casualties and preserved multiple suspects for interrogation. Mission accomplished. As Marcus began disassembling his rifle, he reflected on how quickly his life had changed. 3 days ago, he'd been a civilian security contractor working routine assignments. Now he was back in his element, using skills he'd hoped never to need again in defense of an innocent man's life. Dave's voice crackled through the communication system, shaky but grateful. Marcus, I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't been watching over me. That's what friends do, Dave. Besides, this was never just about you. These people were threatening national security by smuggling weapons to hostile nations. Stopping them was everybody's responsibility. As federal agents processed the crime scene below, Marcus carefully packed his equipment and prepared to descend from his Overwatch position. The immediate threat was over, but he knew there would be follow-up investigations, court proceedings, and probably media attention. Agent Rodriguez met him as he reached street level. Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that your actions today directly contributed to dismantling an international smuggling operation. We recovered evidence from the suspects that will lead to arrests in 3 other countries. I'm glad I could help. What happens to Dave now? Mr. Morrison will be under federal protection until the remaining members of this organization are captured, but our intelligence suggests today's operation broke the back of their entire network. He should be able to return to normal life within a few weeks. Marcus nodded, feeling the satisfaction that came from a mission completed successfully. The 3 men who had threatened Dave at the gun show were in custody. Their associates were either captured or fleeing, and an international criminal operation had been disrupted. As the sun set over the Seattle Industrial District, Marcus realized that some skills never truly fade away. When innocent people were threatened and his country's security was at stake, he would always be ready to answer the call. Dave approached him as the federal agents finished their preliminary crime scene work. Marcus, I owe you my life. If there's ever anything I can do to repay you, just keep being an honest businessman and helping law enforcement when they need it, Marcus replied. The world needs more people willing to do the right thing, even when it's dangerous. As they walked away from the scene together, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Rodriguez. Mr. Thompson, the Bureau could use someone with your skills on a consulting basis. Interested in more work like this? Marcus looked at the message for a long moment, then put the phone away without responding. Some decisions required time and careful thought. But as he helped Dave into a federal protection vehicle, Marcus knew that his days as a simple civilian security contractor were probably over. The skills of a Navy SEAL sniper, once learned, were never truly forgotten. And in a world where good people face threats from those who would exploit and harm others, those skills would always be needed. The threat was over, but Marcus Thompson was just beginning to understand that his real mission in life was far from complete.